Even as he fills out his cabinet at a rapid pace, Donald Trump's return to the White House shrouded in secrecy. Team Trump following little of the norms and conventions put in place for the transfer of power. It's raising lots of questions about why the incoming administration wants to keep Americans in the dark about everything from who is funding the transition to who exactly are the people who will lead the country, for the next 4 years. Brand new reporting from the New York Times laying out the consequences of Donald Trump's refusing to sign an agreement with the government to kickstart the transition process. From that reporting, quote, President-elect Donald Trump is keeping secret the names of the donors who are funding his transition effort, a break from tradition that could make it impossible to see what interest groups, businesses, or wealthy people are helping launch a second term. Trump has so far declined to sign an agreement with the Biden administration that imposes strict limits on that fundraising in exchange for up to $7.2 million in federal funds earmarked for the transition. By dodging the agreement, Trump can raise unlimited amounts of money from unknown donors to pay for the staff, travel, and office space involved in preparing to take over the government. Unlike with campaign contributions, foreign nationals are allowed to donate to the transition. Joining our conversation, New York Times investigative reporter David Fahrenthold. Molly is also back with us. David, I want to start with you. We read a bit of your reporting. Every president has raised money for the transition. How is this different?
Well, as you said, most presidents raise money from the public, but also take money from the government. And in doing so, they agree to some conditions. They agree to disclose who their donors are and how much they gave. And they agree to limit the amount of any donation from any one person to $5,000. Trump is not doing any of that. He doesn't have to. There's no law that says he has to. But he is saying, I'll raise all the money from the public. I won't take any government money. And in return, I get to keep secret who's giving me money and how much they gave. And I also get to not abide by the limit of $5,000 per donor. So this whole transition will be funded in the dark.
OK, and how does that compare to what he did in 2016?
In 2016, he actually agreed to take government money. He agreed to the disclosure limits. He did the same that Biden and Obama and other recent presidents have. So this is a break from the way Trump did it in 2016.
OK, Molly/Emily, it's like I just turned you into like an American Girl doll. Yes. I apologize. This is what people have been afraid of, right? Which is just an utter lack of transparency and a refusal to follow what have been sort of basic norms.
Well, the last time he did fire his transition chair in the end, Chris Christie, and then put Mike Pence in the job. But yes, again, if this is a person who has mused openly about ruling as an autocrat, and so really important that norms and institutions are able to stand. And this kind of behavior is this slippery slope, right? It's a lack of accountability. We don't know where the money's coming from, so we don't know who, how any of it's working. These ethics, rules are in place for a reason.
Right. They're in place for a reason, so that you have an understanding of who has weight in the U.S. government. There's also a reason that the FBI background checks have been standard. That weaves into this conversation. It's a consequence of his not having signed this memo of agreement. I want you to take a listen to what Barbara McQuade had to say about that. Oh, I'm sorry. The process is designed to screen out candidates who are not suitable for high-level decision-making positions because of problems such as addictions, psychological disorders, or a history of committing sexual abuse. A nominee with foreign business interests may skew decisions that favor his overseas portfolio. Perhaps more importantly, the process seeks to weed out potential targets for blackmail because of undisclosed personal secrets, conflicts of interest, foreign ties, or financial distress. Imagine a cabinet official who is hiding an extramarital affair. They may be tempted to share government secrets in exchange for silence. Or think of a broke cabinet official who is so desperate for money they're willing to sell their access to government information. A background investigation assures the public that officials in sensitive positions can be trusted to act in the best interests of the American people. Not having these screenings has huge consequences for high-level decision-making in the U.S. government. I remember when my now husband was my boyfriend, and he was working in the first Obama administration. I got one of these background calls, and they asked me all of these questions. At the end, I joked to the FBI agent and said, well, if I was wrong about any of this, will you call back and you let me know? And she said, ma'am, this is very serious.
Yeah.
And it is. There is a reason that this is proper protocol.
Yeah, and these are real jobs. I mean, Pete Hegseth will, if he gets this appointment, he will lead 3 million plus people. I mean, this is a real, cabinet position. And I think the worry they have is that some of these cabinet members, these appointees, will not make it through them.
David, is that the concern, that they already have a sense that some of these candidates will not pass vet?
I don't think it's as much that as they think they don't have to do that. You remember, try to imagine the Trump groups there, this new administration's view toward the FBI and toward the Justice Department. They see it, rightly or wrongly, as enemies, people that investigated them, people that sort of, hounded Trump through his first term. So I think they're unwilling to sort of let those folks have a big role in this, or they want to minimize the role those folks are going to have. I think they're going to still have to play some role for people to get security clearances down the road. But at least for now, the Trump transition seems to want to give their own vetting, whatever that is, rather than trusting the FBI to do it.
But what is that, David? I mean, when you say whatever that is, what is their alternate theory of the case?
Well, at this point, one of the interesting contrasts is we've been told all along before the election, the Trump people are spending all this time. They're not going to end up like last time where these people were chosen at random. They're going to spend all this time vetting, listing, compiling lists of qualified people. But in the end, it just seems like Trump watches Fox News and picks the people who are on Fox News. Or in the case of Matt Gaetz, picks the people who are on the plane with him. His methods don't seem to really have anything to do with that long process, or frankly, with background checks. People like Hegseth and Gaetz had these huge unresolved issues that anybody with Google could have found out, and Trump chose them anyway. So I don't think even if they're doing their own background checks, it doesn't seem to really affect what Trump is doing. He's choosing some of the most compromised people anyway.
Right. I mean, on one hand, it feels as though he is doing casting for a reality show, which we know he is wont to do. And it also feels that to some extent he's thumbing his nose at these institutions in the selection of some of these picks. To illustrate that point, I want you to take a listen to what Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth had to say about Tulsi Gabbard. She has been tapped to be the Director of National Intelligence.
I think she's compromised. I think by going to Syria and basically backing a brutal dictator there, Russian-controlled media called her a Russian asset. So I do think that we have a real deep concern whether or not she's a compromised person. And frankly, the U.S. Intelligence Committee, the U.S. intelligence community has identified her as having troubling relationships with America's foes. And so my worry is that she couldn't pass a background check.
Okay, so David, we know that Democrats in the U.S. Senate are going to play a key role during these confirmation hearings, asking a series of difficult questions. And in the case of all of these nominees, what does your reporting tell you about the role that Senate Republicans are likely to play in these confirmation hearings?
Well, I think there are a few candidates. Most of these folks are going to get through, but there are a few candidates. And I would say that's Hegseth, the Defense Secretary nominee, Tulsi Gabbard, the ODNI nominee, and maybe Robert Kennedy, where, they can only afford to lose 4 votes. And I think in some of those cases, there is still an open question about whether they would get those 4 Republican votes and be able to get to approval. So I do think we still shouldn't take it for granted that the Republican Senate is going to approve Trump's nominees in a few of these cases. And it will be reporting, and it honestly will be hearings that will bring out more detail. And these folks have so much in their backgrounds that Democratic senators are sort of raring to get going. They want to start holding hearings now, but even before the Republicans hand over, because they feel like there's so much to expose.
We have these leaders of the Project 2025 agenda, something you've probably heard about if you follow the news. And Trump famously, repeatedly asserted, claimed, even at times insisted he didn't back Project 2025, that it was something over there with other people. Well, some of them are now preparing to enter his administration in key roles. Trump has picked people for all 15 cabinet level spots now. So as we had here now 3 weeks out, basically marking 3 weeks since the election tomorrow, he's moving faster than many other president-elects. He's seizing a kind of focus and giving those people an earlier start for any prep they want to do. They now have all this time till January before they go to hearings and possible confirmation and into those jobs. This speed, though, has also meant that Trump is skipping the vetting and the FBI checks, which protect the government and its people. And that's why one of the top picks is already out. Trump ending last week with his first loss of the incoming administration, and it was a big one. Matt Gaetz, the firebrand that he picked for AG, that he sent down to the Senate along with his vice president-elect to meet with senators to make this pitch. That's how they started this whole thing. And it's a sign of how Donald Trump, while the winner of this election, is also a one-term sort of lame duck figure. We don't usually have presidents take a break and then go into a second term. And so the cabinet is where we're seeing the testing, and in some places where we're seeing Trump make some headway, putting in all these people and also getting early losses. As for the Project 2025 news, Trump has now chosen at least 7 of its authors for various posts. Now, some of these are the kind of posts that fill out any large administration and may not be super important, or we can't say yet what type of larger impact those people will have. Others, including Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, are clearly in the driver's seat in the White House. Now, this makes some sense. I always try to tell you what's true, best we understand it, what's logical, whatever your opinion or views of these people and what they said in Project 2025, which you're free to have. It makes some sense that Donald Trump is drawing on the aides and staffers and insiders that overlap with Project 2025. So it's not like, oh my God, can you believe Stephen Miller's back in the White House? He was in the White House the first time. We've interviewed him precisely because of his important role around Trump. So this isn't a 5-alarm fire that you cannot believe it's happening. It is, however, and we'll bring you the facts as we get them, it is, however, a contradiction of what Donald Trump ran on when the same issue of Project 2025 came up. Because he ran away from the ingredients of Project 2025 because he and his aides on the Trump campaign determined that it was not politically popular. For example, national abortion ban was basically in 25. Gutting the Department of Education, which for any of its criticisms is still a thing that is more popular with many teachers and parents than the idea of going back several decades and having no federal role in the department. Republicans basically saw that the perception of Project 2025 and the ingredients of Project 2025, including a national abortion ban, were dragging down their party. And that led to many MAGA leaders and Donald Trump trying to do something that maybe it worked or maybe it didn't matter because people were voting on other issues, but with all the overlap that I'm telling you about, and you probably remember some of it if you follow the news, they then had to go out from Trump on down and try to de-MAGAfy a MAGA plan that was originally touted as the MAGA plan for governing.
I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it.
Project 2025 is not affiliated with the Trump campaign.
I don't know what the hell it is. It's Project 25. He's involved in Project, and then they read some of the things, and they are extreme. I mean, they're seriously extreme. But I don't know anything about it. I don't want to know anything about it.
It's extreme, which you only know because you know something about it, but you know nothing about it, but you won't read it. It went on like this. And again, I want to say in all fairness, politicians do this. We've reported on things that Donald Trump has done that are different or more extreme or radical. We also report on things he does that more fit into, quite frankly, what makes people sort of burnt out and annoyed with politics in general, which is what's the point of listening to a debate, I just showed you a clip from it, if politicians are constantly running from and spinning their own history. Now, that doesn't mean you can't get a clear view on things if you follow the facts, listen to different sources, and learn. Now, that would mean, of course, like I just showed you, listening to a debate that has both candidates or talking to people in both campaigns, as we have done throughout our reporting in this whole era. So we interviewed Trump aides during the campaign and asked about Project 2025. We used our platform, our journalistic power, if you want to call it that, to try to get answers, to try to have a back and forth and to learn. And we also saw, and we discussed it with these aides and in our fact checks in and around these interviews, that there was clearly a tension between what I just showed you, the overlap of Donald Trump's aides and advisors and veterans writing up 2025 and saying this was the MAGA plan, and then the political reality that it was a drag on Trump and other Republicans. So when I asked several different top Trump aides about it, on this program, remember, they all denied the links.
That Project 2025 has absolutely nothing to do with the past, present, or future President Trump.
The president, his campaign have made it very clear that no one speaks for their policies except for him or their campaign.
It's very simple. President Trump has said he has nothing to do with Project 2025.
Pretty clear. That's more than one official. Some of them had past White House experience. Some of them had campaign experience. Miller, as mentioned, going back into the second term. And so what you get there is an important piece of evidence, what we call going on the record in the business. They said in public when they wanted your vote that this wasn't what they were about, from Donald Trump on down. And now that they got your vote, they're going back into office to use your votes, the power they got from this election. And they're not just picking one or two, they're picking several prominent Project 2025 authors and contributors, including the co-author of the whole thing, Russell Vought, who Trump is tapping to be a White House budget officer, which is an important thing in the federal government, right? The budget kind of intersects with just about everything. And he's a Trump loyalist. He has talked about trying to sort of kneecap or destroy various different federal agencies. And the Center for Climate Reporting did some undercover work, which is kind of a sting, so it isn't something that certified, verified journalists do, where they kind of went undercover, but it does expose some of what Vought says, and here it is.
80% of my time is working on the plans of what's necessary to take control of these bureaucracies, whether it's destroying their agency's notion of independence. They're independent from the president.
The whole notion of an independent agency should be thrown out, particularly with the Department of Justice.
The president has, the ability both along the border and elsewhere to maintain law and order with the military.
This is about power. You don't have to be an expert on all the different issues in independent regulatory agencies or what many Trump allies and other conservatives before Trump came to prominence talked about, which was once seen as a more radical agenda, that you would use government power to try to kneecap and take control of parts of the government which had been deemed more independent, that word again, because many people over the years thought it was better, this was kind of a nonpartisan consensus, to have parts of the government that aren't as partisan and under control of the back and forth of the elections. For example, what do you want the military to do? That's generally been less partisan, more independent. What do you want the medical rules to be at the FDA? Most folks thought they shouldn't zigzag every 4 or 8 years based on party. And in the Supreme Court, there has been a long-term, multi-decade effort to take more control from these independent agencies, at least if Republicans are in charge. You can have a discussion on a separate day about how some of this fades when they don't think they can run the place. Now, the Trump campaign says that undercover video and that stuff has nothing to do with the campaign itself. But Vought is going to have more power, the individual I'm showing you here. And some of that involves just big priorities about the budget. For example, food assistance for Americans or children who might be hungry, that could be cut. Project 2025 also calls for that. So you can see that some of the stuff that wasn't popular was written down in the book that they ran from, which now looks like it's going to get a second life in the second term. As for restructuring the DOJ, well, again, I just showed you they ended last week having to skip out on the nominee they originally wanted, but empowering the president to have more direct control over prosecution goes back to what has been a disfavored Nixon-era thing. And remember, I've told you this before, this isn't all just left, right, red, blue stuff. There's a heck of a lot of people, independents, traditional conservatives who don't think, after the lessons of Nixon, that the DOJ should have that kind of power. Here's Trump's new AG pick on the issue.
The Department of Justice, the prosecutors will be prosecuted, the bad ones. The investigators will be investigated, because the deep state, last term for President Trump, they were hiding in the shadows. But now they have a spotlight on them, and they can all be investigated, and the House needs to be cleaned out.
Now, I told you last week, Pam Bondi has a lot more work experience as an AG and working in state governments than Matt Gaetz did. So she comes into this much more in line with the type of experience that past presidents have sought. And if you're tracking these picks, that means that Trump started somewhere way, you see on the screen, way over here with Matt Gaetz and moved to Bondi, right? And she'll go through her confirmation process. But whether or not she has the experience, the Senate also has a big obligation to check whether she meant what she said in those statements and how they are going to try to ensure the independence and the rule of law in the United States, which is something that is supposed to matter regardless of who wins. Why does that relate to Project 2025? Well, think about it. Yes, there's a certain amount of political spin in all of this. But if these are people who will tell you one thing to get your vote and say it out loud from the candidate on down, no, that's not our plan, and then turn around and not even wait weeks, 2-3 weeks in, stuff the operation with all the people they said they had nothing to do with, then how does the government and these co-equal branches of government, the Congress, and the rest of us in society and the press, how do we take these claims and promises when they evaporate so quickly into thin air? That's not just politics as usual. It's part of the challenge of the rest of our governance together, which sometimes matters even more after an election than during it.
What's going on here, Vaughn? I know you've been following this closely, but do we have a sense of whether Team Trump ever expects to get this paperwork signed?
This is paperwork that is normally signed months before, and yet we are now 3 weeks after the election, and every single week I have asked the transition, hey, is there any update? Are you guys not going to sign the paperwork? Because not only are we talking background checks, we're also talking about the Trump transition having to turn over financial disclosures, reveal its donors, as well as other potential conflicts of interest. And yet every single time I have been told that they're still in discussions about signing this memorandum of understanding, which would effectively begin these FBI background checks. That is the answer 3 weeks on that we continue to get. I just want to underscore, it's not just the top cabinet posts that you're talking about. There's more than 4,000 political appointees that Donald Trump will be able to nominate and put forward through this, through some of them confirmation proceedings, other them don't need to be Senate affirmed. So this, I think, is a real question mark of whether Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard will ever get these FBI background checks, or is there the potential that he will install his own FBI director at some point, remove Chris Wray, and that a lot of these thousands of other appointees will never even go through this process themselves.
So some curious, very serious questions you're raising. Ken, what is the broad concern if, say, private investigators end up doing these checks instead of the FBI, which is, as we pointed out, something we've seen for 7 decades?
Yeah, Chris, private investigators can do a thorough background check on someone, but they don't have access to the same kind of information that the FBI does, particularly if we're talking about national security issues. So, if, for example, if there was a counterintelligence investigation related to Tulsi Gabbard's trip to meet with Syrian dictator Assad, only the FBI would have access to that. Private investigators wouldn't. In the case of Matt Gaetz, the FBI would have had access to the criminal investigation file where he wasn't prosecuted. No one else would be able to see that. So the FBI has the ability to get information that no one else can, and it also has a level of credibility. But of course, the Trump folks do not trust this FBI. They've made very clear that that's the case, and so they may be reluctant to use the FBI for these background checks.
Ken, thank you for that. Okay, Sahil, I want to play what Oklahoma Republican Senator James Lankford, who is a member of the Intelligence Committee, had to say about Tulsi Gabbard.
Does anything about her concern you?
Well, we'll have lots of questions. She met with Bashir Assad. We'll want to know what the purpose was and what the direction for that was. As a member of Congress, we'll want to get a chance to talk about past comments that she's made and get them into full context. So sure, there's comments that are floating out there, but we want to be able to know the rest of the story.
We want to be able to know. Interesting sentence there. So, Sahil, what is the level of concern you are hearing from lawmakers, specifically Republicans, that there is information out there they may not know that maybe can't be uncovered without an FBI investigation?
Yeah, there is some real concern, Chris. I think an FBI background check would ease at least some of the anxieties that senators have toward this very unconventional pick, Tulsi Gabbard, for DNI, in part because of her sympathetic, her warm views toward Russia. Remember, a lot of senators are still Russia hawks. The Senate is still not as magnified in Trump's image as the House Republican conference is, and a background check could potentially get that information that they wonder may be out there. There's not anything specific that they're looking for here. I think it's more of a peace of mind sort of thing. The situation, her trip with Assad in Syria is also a question. The issue here is that the DNI oversees intel briefings for the president. So some, our NBC News colleagues have reported concerns within the intel community, people who are close to senators, that she could potentially filter information to Trump through a pro-Russia lens. Also, Chris, an FBI background check protects them politically. Remember, these senators are politicians who have to answer to a constituency. If there is something there, and they don't know that there is, if there is something there, they would much rather know before they cast a vote, to make sure something potentially bad doesn't happen for a nominee that they ultimately supported to this very powerful position.
Yeah, if something blows up, you don't want to be the person who voted for.
Okay, David, a lot's been written, right, about why Trump chose people that he knew had obvious personal and political baggage. Some say, well, you know, he feels sort of a kindred spirit with people who have been accused of things they say they didn't do. Maybe it's because, as Axios says, he wants people who are the Roy Cohn types, you know, the attorney general he always wished he could have, who can kind of do the so-called political dirty work. Why do you think? Do you think he felt emboldened by the results, or he figured he's just going to fight it through? Why put yourself in this position?
Yeah, look, I think all of the above. Let's step back for a minute. This transition is so much more prepared and ready to go than the transition 8 years ago, when they scrapped the work they had done because of internal disagreements, started over, and the new president at the time, who had never been president, is busy trying to place people in positions that he doesn't know, may not align with in terms of his agenda. And a lot of those people ended up being fired or let go because of inadequate background checks, things they weren't aware of. So this time around, it is a much smoother operation. And yet, I think the easiest way to understand Trump is to have watched his campaign, right? Why did he first nominate Gates and now Pam Bondi for Attorney General? Because he wants people that are going to be more attuned to what he wants and not be willing to play the independent role that some people like to think of, as the Attorney General. He wants people like RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, who look at national security and other issues the way he does, that reflect the coalition that elected him. Now, as for the mandate, all presidents do this. They win, and they imagine in their head that people voted for them for every last single thing they ever said from the day they started running to the day they won. I think this mandate exists for two things, if it exists for anything, which is get inflation under control, make people feel like they've got more money in their pocket, and make people feel safer by getting the border under control and getting their communities under control. Beyond that, I think what the new president will find out after he takes office is that some of the things people will be fine with as long as it doesn't interfere in their daily life, and other things they will push back on, and he'll have to learn just like everybody else does.
So, Sahil, what are lawmakers saying about the chances for some other candidates? I mean, obviously, Tulsi Gabbard being one we've just talked about, but Pete Hegseth, RFK Jr.
Yeah, Chris, I would start by saying the Matt Gaetz for AG rejection sort of stands on its own. This was in a category of a nomination that many senators, both Democrat and Republican, viewed as preposterous on its face, not just for the ethics allegations, but many of them didn't see Matt Gaetz as minimally qualified for the position. I don't know for sure that any of the other nominees rise to that level, at least not quite the level of Matt Gaetz, but that doesn't mean they're all going to get confirmed easily. There are still real questions and real issues that some members have with several of the nominees. Pete Hegseth is one of them. There are sexual misconduct allegations, which his lawyer has called baseless. There's some senators say do a background check. Bill Hagerty, as you pointed out, said Americans don't care about a background check. Trump won on change and disruption. There's RFK for HHS. The Republican concern about this is interesting. They don't like the fact that he's been supportive of abortion rights. That may be his biggest problem with the GOP senators who would have to ultimately vote on his nomination. And of course, Democrats have plenty of concerns about his anti-vaccine rhetoric. Nevertheless, one senator closely aligned with Donald Trump, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, says he believes the votes are there to confirm RFK. Take a listen to what he said.
I've done my unofficial whip count with both Republicans and Democrats. The conversation almost always starts with, boy, there's a lot that I just love that Bobby Kennedy's talking about and pushing, the chronic illness and better nutrition. But I have these concerns. Based on the list of concerns, knowing Bobby, I think he'll be able to, answer those concerns, and I think he'll be able to be confirmed quite easily.
Now, the standard caveat here, Chris, Ron Johnson is not the whip. He's from the MAGA wing of the party that was always expected to confirm the vast bulk, if not all, of Trump's nominees. And finally, there is Pam Bondi, the replacement nominee for AG, who has gotten some concerns about the fact that she was a registered foreign lobbyist for the government of Qatar. There was also some talk about, the so-called retribution agenda that Donald Trump ran on. James Langford was on the Sunday shows talking about how he wants to hear from her that she recognizes she is not Donald Trump's lawyer, as she literally has been in the past, but that in this position, she would be America's lawyer.
President-elect Donald Trump has filled out his core cabinet positions, as well as several other top spots in his administration. Trump has chosen Scott Bessent as Treasury Secretary. He's a Wall Street billionaire who's an advocate for deficit reduction and deregulation. He has also supported extending Trump's 2017 tax cuts. Trump named...
See, now there's a rub. We got a $36 trillion national debt.
Yeah.
And if you extend those tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans, that's only going to cause the deficit to spike. So, again, there's a challenge there. They're going to have to figure out if he really, if he holds both of those as being important.
Yeah,
that's going to be a huge challenge. Well, I don't think he can get there with a $36 trillion debt, but we'll see.
Also, Trump named Brooke Rollins to lead the Department of Agriculture. Rollins is a conservative lawyer who served as domestic policy chief during Trump's first term. After leaving the White House, she became president and CEO of the America First Policy Institute, a group that helped lay the groundwork for a second Trump administration. Former pro football player Scott Turner is Trump's pick for HUD secretary. Turner ran the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council during Trump's first term. He also is involved with the America First Policy Institute. Trump's choice for labor secretary is Republican Congresswoman Lori Chavez Derrimer of Oregon. She's a staunch union ally and one of only a few House Republicans to support major pro-union legislation. The president-elect also named Russell Voigt, who was co-author of the Project 2025, to lead the Office of Management and Budget. It's a role he held during Trump's first term. Vaught also advocated for the president to have greater control over government agencies such as the FCC and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Trump selected former Republican Congressman Dave Weldon of Florida to lead the CDC. Weldon is a medical doctor who has been critical of the agency and its vaccination program. He has also pushed a long-debunked claim that a preservative used in some vaccines is linked to autism.
We have a lot to talk about here. First of all, I went to Congress with Dave, known Dave for a long time. But I want to talk first of all, and then we're going to talk about, this is not an ideologically pure cabinet by any stretch of the imagination. Michael Beschloss yesterday told the Times one of the more ideologically, if you want to call it diverse and consistent, whatever you want to call it, Vaughn, we're going to let somebody much smarter than me figure out the best way to describe it. I want to talk, though, about one pick that conservatives are really angry about, and that is the labor secretary pick. First of all, why are they angry? Secondly, why did he select somebody that the base would be so upset about? Was it like a payback to the Teamsters? What was it?
I think that's a good question, because during the campaign, right, he went up to Michigan and he campaigned this idea of pro, not necessarily union, but pro-worker. And this is where Democrats had a field day. They said, well, he's not actually at union shops. Fast forward. Right. And suddenly, he's picking a labor secretary from the Pacific Northwest, the former congresswoman, who has been much more defensive of labor unions, teachers' unions, somebody who turned a lot of heads. By the way,
even after he did very well with the union voters.
Correct, right? Absolutely. Yeah. And now this is an affront. Again, this is the reposturing of today's Republican Party, that Donald Trump can face the criticism from some on the right, but it's his party now, and this labor secretary, there's no reason to believe that she's not going to pass with Democratic support.
And Michael Beschloss, that's the thing. And the New York Times, in the article where they quoted you, just basically said, hey, this is not a conservative Republican Party. This is not a moderate Republican Party. This is Donald Trump's Republican Party. It is what he says it is. And you were quoted in there talking about how these picks, you cannot line them up ideologically. Talk about it.
Well, they're not robots. You know, everything Donald Trump led us to believe during the campaign was that he wanted to be a strong president and a successful president. And a lot of that rhetoric suggested that he would have almost, identical robots in the cabinet and among his aides. But if you look at history, what is the lesson of history? The lesson of history is strong and successful presidents, almost every single one, they have people in their entourage, cabinet, and in their White House who argue with one another. Do that in front of the president. Tell him what he doesn't want to hear. And the essential quality here is a president who listens to all that. Classic example in history was George Washington, who you would think did not need any advice at all. His Secretary of the Treasury was Hamilton. Secretary of State was Jefferson. They argued with each other all the time about things like the size of government, how you finance it. George Washington benefited. In modern times, you know this case particularly, Joe. Under Ronald Reagan, George Shultz and Cap Weinberger argued about, is Gorbachev serious? What should we do about the Cold War? Should we increase defense spending or lower it? Reagan hated the conflict, but he learned from it. It made him a stronger president.
And Jim VandeHei, Axios wrote a similar, you and Mike Allen wrote a similar article this past weekend talking about how it is hard to see a through line with a lot of these picks. Some of them very, very right wing. The labor secretary, left of center, and most conservatives would say very left wing. Then you've got RFK Jr. that is just all over the place ideologically, and several other picks that are, again, just sort of random and all over the place.
Because it's a very different Republican Party. It's not a conservative party anymore. It is, as you said, the Donald Trump party. He sees a real, I think, opportunity to continue to grow the party. A big part of that is working class voters. Whether or not he agrees with everybody on the specifics of the union debate, he went with somebody who traditional conservatives would hate. This person would never make it into a George W. Bush cabinet per se, but under a Trump world, they will. And he doesn't care if people don't like any of these picks. He doesn't care if you don't like their personality, their background. I think he, unlike most people, enjoys conflict. In fact, I think he often incites conflict. He loves it to play out in front of him, so he can ultimately be the decider. It keeps him being unpredictable, which he likes, and he thinks that gives him a stronger governing hand. And so there'll be all kinds of conflict. There will be both publicly and privately. That is kind of the nature of the Trump operation.
All right, Jonathan.
Yeah, so, I think that's right. First of all, Trump in his first term really almost enjoyed the fight around him at the Oval Office. He'd bring in aides around the desk and have them pit one against each other. Now, some of that was for simply West Wing jockeying, who was up, who was down, but that's what he would make a decision from. He'd hear people and then decide. Often the last voice he heard would be the one that would carry the day. But here with the union pick, this is him trying to remake the party. This is him trying to bring in more of those working class voters, union voters. He spent a lot of time courting that vote in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, other places this time around, and was able to have not just the benefit of union votes, but a couple of major unions did not offer endorsements, which was seen as sort of a tacit victory for him at the time. This is sort of paying off here. And we have seen some extreme right-wing picks and other very conventional ones. His choice for Treasury Secretary, you point out the inconsistency with the debt, perhaps, but most felt like, well, that's a conventional pick.
Make no mistake. Every banker, every person on Wall Street that we talked to over the past couple of weeks said this guy will calm the market.
Completely.
So yeah. No, I said what I said only because I'm obsessed with deficits and the debt. And they have a huge decision to make, which I know you'll want to talk about tax cuts and how you pay for those tax cuts, because we learned time and again they don't pay for themselves. But no, the Treasury Secretary, Wall Street, banks, the markets, they're all very happy.
Yeah, and we'll sail through. There's no expectation of any concern there whatsoever. And a number of his picks Friday night were in a blitz. We had like a couple dozen came out in a few hours on Friday. Some of the health choices raised a few eyebrows, but for the most part, conventional picks that were met with some acclaim on both sides of the aisle.
So let's